Very few games have made me feel as uneasy as the Portal series. From the innocuous cover of the first game to the truly disturbing contents of the lore, Portal has it all and more. Welcome to Nightmare Fuel, a series where I dive into the worlds of different franchises to find the disturbing Easter eggs, moments, and lore they have lurking beneath the surface. Today we're talking about one of my favorite game franchises of all time, Portal. Portal is known for its sense of humor and its lurking horror. Around the fun puzzle gameplay hides a story that begs you to keep digging into it. If you do, you'll find myriads of disturbing moments, Easter eggs, and theories. Portal is probably the one game that I think of when I imagine the Nightmare Fuel concept. Before we start our descent down the iceberg, I ask that you consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on the video. If you want to see even more of my content, you can follow me on social media or become a member of my Patreon. Links to everything are in the description below. Welcome everyone to the Portal series Nightmare Fuel Iceberg Explained. Portal invites you in with music from a radio and the main protagonist, Chell, waking up in what appears to be a bedroom with walls made of glass. A robotic female voice greets you, and then you notice there's something beyond the glass. It appears to be some sort of lab. Even though the robotic voice sounds nice, you can already feel like something is a bit off. This intro is the perfect way to set up a game that wants you to have set expectations before they flip them on you. As you start to complete the puzzles, questions will come to mind, like why am I doing this? Who else is here? Why is my reward cake? Even with these questions, you'll push forward, eager to see what awaits you. The intro to Portal is a perfect start to a game, with a subtle horror atmosphere. It immediately feels off, but not so off that you aren't willing to explore and see what awaits you. If you didn't really pick up on the subtle vibes that the game was already giving off, then you'll notice once you find one of these hidden areas. Canned food is all over the place, computer parts strewn about. There's writing on the walls. Someone has been living inside the walls of the testing facility. That much is obvious, but you're not sure who. These are called Rattmann Dens, and they belong to a scientist who escaped something. Something that forced him into the walls to survive. The first time you find one, it can be pretty creepy. The way they are hidden all over the game makes for excellent world building and shows you the true colors of the game, and makes you doubt the AI that is talking to you. You are intrigued now. And these dens are the perfect place to start digging for the lore of the game. In a specific chamber you can find the most disturbing of the Rattmann Dens. In Test Chamber 17 you can find a Rattmann Den behind some broken walls. Inside you'll see the walls covered in black and red ink. The writings are mostly unintelligible rants, but there's something more there. There's a poem on the wall referring to losing one of the Campanion cubes. And there's pictures with people's faces covered by pictures of the Campanion cube. In big red letters it says, "She's watching you," with a drawing of a camera. If you look right at the crack of the broken wall, you can see a camera staring directly at you. A question you may have asked earlier is what happened here? Where are all of the scientists? Why is this building so empty and quiet? That answer has been talking to you the whole time. GlaDOS is the AI that acts as Chell's guide and is an antagonizing force. She will constantly give backhanded compliments and say borderline threatening things. As Chell completes the test, GlaDOS' tone will start to change and should become more antagonistic. GlaDOS is the reason for the whole game. Before the events of Portal, GlaDOS actually killed all of the scientists using a deadly neurotoxin. She unleashed the neurotoxin on Bring Your Daughter to Work Day, which makes it just so much darker. This isn't the first time the AI has done this either. A time prior when she'd done this, they'd had to shut her down, which led to the scientists creating morality cores that would be attached to GlaDOS to hopefully stop her from doing it again, which we all know how that went. This is also the perfect time to talk about the theory surrounding GlaDOS' design. This is what GlaDOS looks like. a giant hulking machine attached to some wires coming from the ceiling. The design is pretty easily recognizable in the gaming world by now. But doesn't she look a little off? Like perhaps a little humanoid? This theory states that GlaDOS is supposed to represent a woman upside down, bound, and gagged. There's even some creepy art to go with the theory. It shows the comparison, and it's kind of easy to make that comparison when they're side by side. This theory, as far as I know, has never been confirmed by the developers. Though, with how her personality and everything comes out with the reveal of her backstory, it's believable. There's more to GlaDOS' backstory, but we'll get to that later down the iceberg. Moving into Portal 2, the player can find even more Rattmann Dens. This time, though, there's a noticeable upgrade to how they look. Each one has a unique look and paints a much darker picture to the desperation that Rattmann felt while avoiding GlaDOS. The Rattmann Dens are getting more diverse and adding new pieces of art. Each den now feels unique, but most of them still seem to have the same ramblings of the madman covering the walls. The dens are creepier now than in the first game. The walls' art feels more elaborate as well. Food cans litter every floor, and they feel more lived in. There's a total of 7 dens in the game, with each one getting more and more disturbed. Some of them even have Easter eggs hidden within, something we'll cover later on in the iceberg. A lot of horror games rely heavily on setting a tone through the environment and the ambient noise. Well, Portal has probably some of the best mood-setting ambient noise for a non-horror game. Every chamber feels abandoned thanks to the ambient sounds. Let's listen in on some of that background noise. Not only does each area feel creepy thanks to the amazing sound design, they also each feel solitary, which aside from GlaDOS and Wheatley, you're completely alone, traversing the test chambers that GlaDOS has set out for you. This sound design is by far the most enveloping and claustrophobic feeling of any games I've ever played. Even compared to some horror games, it's hard to match how uneasy Portal's ambiance can make you feel. Portal 1's final test is pretty simple. Actually, one of the easiest test chambers in the game. With that one completed, it's time to enjoy some cake. Well, if you survive, that is. GlaDOS promises cake as you round the corner on a moving platform, but you'll start to notice some weird flickering glow just around the bend. That's when you'll see the flames of the incinerator, and if you still trusted GlaDOS for some reason up to this point, that trust should be entirely shattered. GlaDOS is going to reward you by burning you alive. This probably would have been the darkest ending of any puzzle game at the time. You completed the test, and now you must pay for it with your life. Of course you can escape that scenario, but it doesn't change how bad that ending could have been. At the end of the first Portal game, you have to fight GlaDOS as the only boss battle in the game. This will be the first time you've seen the hulking monstrosity that has been antagonizing you the whole game. GlaDOS is a giant robot creature that hangs from the ceiling. She looks down at you, and only then do you realize just how small you are. If you have a fear of giant entities, then this might trigger that a little. The boss fight is fairly simple, as you just have to knock off the personality cores and throw them into the nearby incinerator. As you take off the first one, GlaDOS will start to release the same neurotoxin that she used to kill the scientists. It becomes a tense race against the clock to defeat her before Chell is set up to meet the exact same fate. The opening screen when you start up Portal 2 has GlaDOS deactivated and lying on the ground. This giant hulking machine is now lifeless and abandoned. This whole scene gives off that same vibe as staring at a sleeping T-Rex from Jurassic Park. Even in a deactivated state, GlaDOS is still menacing. The background noise here also adds to the vague foreboding that the player feels. The menu in Portal 2 is used very effectively to set tone. The menu will change based on where you are in the game and what you've seen. The music that accompanies each screen is also great at setting the mood. It makes you wonder why the developers haven't tried to make an actual horror game. One of the oldest internet memes to date, "The cake is a lie," refers to the fact that GlaDOS is lying about the cake the player will receive at the end of the test. This one meme has sparked a lot of discussion in the community still. There's actually a cake that can be found if you look through the game's files. You can even find the room if you glitch through the walls, as it's hidden beneath all the test chambers. The cake exists, but its only real purpose is for that ending cutscene where the cake is shown for a split second before the candle is put out. "The cake is a lie" has taken on more life on the internet and on merchandise than it was actually used in the game. "The cake is a lie" is written on the walls of one of the Rattmann Dens. This is actually the only place you'll see that reference in the game. It's mainly used to show that GlaDOS isn't telling the truth and that there's more going on at Aperture. One of the most popular theories in the community is that Cave Johnson, the man that owns and runs Aperture, and his personal assistant Carolyn are the parents of the main character Chell. This theory has been widely discussed within the community. There's a few things that make it believable though. Firstly, in Portal 2 you can find a science mural that has Chell's name on it, clearly from the Bring Your Daughter to Work Day event. This, at least, shows that Chell is the daughter of one of the employees. When GlaDOS finds out that she has Carolyn's personality and essentially her soul inside of her, she even defends and acts motherly towards Chell for a bit. These scenes are very off character for her, but kind of point to that theory being true. The theory goes deeper, as Carolyn and Cave Johnson were shown to be very close. Closer than those that work together, showing that they could have had a child together even if neither of them acknowledged it. Something to think about, I guess. Canopsia is described as the forlorn or eerie atmosphere of a place that is usually full of people and life, but now sits completely empty or abandoned. Empty hotel lobbies, abandoned malls, and shut down schools can all give off this feeling. The same can be said for the levels of Portal. Portal's levels consist of empty test chambers, labs, and abandoned office spaces. The forlorn atmosphere comes heavily from the emptiness of the levels and the lack of people in life. In the first game, Chell feels very much alone, save for the voice of GlaDOS. The latter half of the game has Chell climbing through the abandoned office spaces of Aperture, and it all feels so eerie. Portal 2 keeps this going with the addition of showing the labs destroyed and looking like nature's coming to reclaim them. It kind of reminds me of empty malls that haven't been torn down. They're full of relics from the past and the nature that is coming back. Portal 2 also takes you to the past and the underground parts of Aperture. You can see how the place was expanded from the 50s to the 80s. The empty offices look like they came straight out of their respective eras as well. The music in Portal complements the harsh lab environment with harsh tones and mechanized sounds that really add to the creepy atmosphere of the game. Portal 1 relied mainly on the ambient noise to set the tone, but that isn't to say that they didn't have any eerie music. A few of their songs are pretty dark. Android Hell is a great representation of this, having music mixed with the straight ambient noise to create something more. This song makes it seem like something terrible is right around the corner, which is excellent at setting up suspense. Another great example is Self-Esteem Fund, which gives off a very similar feeling. Moving to Portal 2, there's more an emphasis on sound design as the budget increases. The music can still send chills, like with technical difficulties. This song has such a high sense of foreboding that it still makes me feel anxious when I listen to it. If you want a more ominous track, then you could listen to Overgrowth, which is an excellent song that blends well into the ambient noise. This is probably my favorite song in the whole game. It reminds me of how music can not only set a mood and atmosphere, but also drive home a theme or message. This song makes you feel alone and helpless, and I like that. The Rattmann Dens we talked about before belong to a scientist that survived the neurotoxin attack by GlaDOS. His name is Doug Rattmann, and he was a scientist at Aperture. He didn't have a hand in creating GlaDOS, but he was there for her creation. Rattmann survived the second attack of the neurotoxin and went into hiding within the walls of Aperture. The places he hid would become the Rattmann Dens that Chell finds. Initially, when Rattmann went into hiding, he was heavily taunted by GlaDOS. She would antagonize him about his mental illness, schizophrenia. Before the attack, he would take pills for it, but now he was running out. This is what led to the writings on the wall, but the art that he drew was likely a form of therapy for him. As Rattmann was reading a book about art therapy before the incident at Aperture. Rattmann also is the reason Chell gets to test so early. He moved her name to the top of the testing list, believing that she would be the one to stop GlaDOS and escape Aperture. Of course, he was right. Rattmann also left directions for Chell once she escaped the main testing chambers. Rattmann believed in Chell, and he was right to put his faith in her. She would eventually put a stop to GlaDOS in the first game. Something else of note is that Rattmann became best friends with the Campanion cube. This could have been caused by his schizophrenia, or maybe something more. In his early Rattmann Dens, it almost seemed like he was in love with his Campanion cube. This was likely due to his need for companionship and his dire loneliness. But maybe there's more to the Campanion cube. The Campanion cube theory refers to the theory that was originally put forward by the Game Theory channel back in 2013. This became one of the most widely known theories in the community, partly due to how popular MatPat's channel was starting to get, and partly because it was a very interesting and dark theory overall. The theory states that the Campanion cubes that Chell interacts with in Portal are actually filled with the dead bodies of other test subjects. Ones who didn't survive their tests and were then reused to add weight to the Campanion cubes. MatPat points to several instances that make this theory seem like it could be believable, the main one being the sound that the Campanion cubes emit when they are destroyed, which sounds almost like a faint scream, so maybe the test subjects weren't completely dead inside after all. The back office rooms of Aperture can be kind of nightmare fuel for many, especially if you have fear of liminal spaces. Liminal spaces are spaces that are usually filled with people, but are now abandoned, very similar to Canopsia, but just different enough to be its own thing. The office rooms actually have a very similar feeling to another disturbing internet urban legend, the backrooms. Though these spaces are obviously something you can escape from. The offices have their own eerie atmosphere separate from the testing chambers. They feel more claustrophobic and existential, a time capsule of the world that used to be, a sign of life that is no more. Test Chamber 17 in Portal 2 has the final Rattmann Den in the game. This den is a little different from the other ones. There's another piece of art on the wall. This one resembles Chell and even explains how and why she was woken up. Walking around the den, you can faintly hear what sounds like some strange gibberish in the background. It's the voice of Doug Rattmann, and he appears to be trying to say something, but it's incredibly hard to make out. This same gibberish voice appears in one of the songs in the game, called The Ghost of Rattmann. The song is pretty ominous sounding, and the title implies that this is all that remains of the scientist. It's pretty creepy to hear the faint echoes of a man's final moments. Listen for yourself. The ending of Portal has Chell ascending from the destruction of Aperture after her fight with GlaDOS. She then sees the surface of the facility and the sky above. Just as she looks up, everything fades to black. Before the announcement of Portal 2, the team had started to put together a different kind of teaser for the game, one that fits perfectly within the world of Portal. They created their own ARG to announce the game. The ARG is something I'd love to go fully into, but not in this video. Part of the ARG was to update Portal and change the ending. Now when Chell looks up at the sky, and just as she's about to pass out, she starts getting dragged back towards the facility. This change took place 2 days before the announcement of Portal 2. This ending change was to better bridge the gap between the two games, but Chell getting dragged away could be a certain kind of nightmare fuel for many, especially after everything she did to escape the first time. In Portal 2, Wheatley is a kind robot that wakes Chell in order to try and escape Aperture. He escorts her for a fair amount of the early game before you encounter GlaDOS. Even during the first few tests, Wheatley is still there with Chell. Later on in the game, Wheatley and GlaDOS switch places. As in, GlaDOS is forcibly ripped from her body and Wheatley is placed on it instead. This scene is pretty jarring and messed up, as we hear GlaDOS scream out in pain as she is then forced into a potato. Wheatley then, overcome with power and the need to test, turns on Chell. He's gone mad with power, but it's not exactly his fault. GlaDOS' body has an insatiable need to do tests. Wheatley was too dumb to overcome the programming, and it could be what turns him evil. Portal had a comic that helped to bridge the gap between the games and established its backstory. The comic is called Lab Rat, and it stars Doug Rattmann during the events of the first game and what he was doing before. The story starts with him observing Chell making her way through the test chambers. He was there when she defeated GlaDOS and escaped the facility. Rattmann also made his escape, but when he saw her getting dragged back in, he turned around and went back for her. Chell was placed in a cryo chamber, but without any power going to it. Without it, she would die. Rattmann went back into the building to reroute the power, but was shot by turrets while inside. Rattmann did eventually make it in and place her cryo chamber on the backup generator, but had no way of getting her out of cryo. She would be in there until someone woke her up. With his final mission complete, Doug Rattmann crawled into a relaxation chamber and fell unconscious. This comic was a really interesting way of bridging the stories and established the much needed backstory for GlaDOS and Rattmann. The art in the comic is really good and matches well with the aesthetic of the world of Portal. The Portal creepypasta Hell is about an unnamed author who buys a used copy of the orange box from GameStop. It contains some of their favorite games, Half-Life and Portal, both of which are excellent games, the author noted. The game was normal until they got to Test Chamber 19, which also played normal until reaching GlaDOS. The author was then teleported back to the spot where GlaDOS tries to incinerate you, but there was no way to escape this time, and he actually was killed in the fire. The screen went black with a loading bar at the bottom. The author saw a red portal that didn't look familiar but ran for it anyway. After going through the portal, the author found themselves on a new level. The area was covered in high-rising flames and had rotting, rusty turrets and machinery everywhere. The only option for the author was to walk through this hellscape. The author eventually fought a rusty version of GlaDOS. The fight was going similar, but GlaDOS didn't seem to have any weak spots. That's when the author noticed GlaDOS was suspended over a lake of fire and saw a knife hanging above her. They shot the knife with the portal gun, which fell and cut GlaDOS' only suspension cable. GlaDOS fell from her roost into the lava below and began to submerge. The game then returned to normal after that. The author still has no idea how to get back to that place and has tried many times to no avail. Wheatley tells Chell a ghost story about a time where a scientist went mad and chopped up his entire staff of robots. He mentions how you can still hear the screams of their replicas, which shouldn't happen since they should have no memory of the event. This ghost story seems like it was supposed to be humorous, but if you look a little deeper, it paints kind of a haunting picture. The robots are all sentient, and somehow they have memories of their past lives being mutilated. Don't Make Lemonade is a mod for Portal that plays very well. It's mostly time-based puzzles and would feel pretty at home in the main game. That is, until you finish the mod. At the end is a big red button that you can press. Once you do, the game suddenly turns you around and you see Chell with white eyes and no pupils staring you down. It's Chell O'Brien. In Chapter 3, Test Chamber 17, you can discover a hidden chamber with some choice graffiti. Fear the turret, for it is Nell that summons to heaven or to hell. There's a picture of Chell sleeping there, but she looks dead. After you leave the chamber, the door to it closes, and so does the door to the office overlooking you. It's almost as if someone was watching you the entire time. How else would the door close? You can actually get into the room, but when you do, you'll see that it's empty. Was it just a coincidence the door closed on you? Or was it someone watching you? This reminds me a lot of how you can find G-Man watching you in Half-Life at random scenes in the game. Either way, the fear of being watched is real for a lot of people, myself included. The fact that everything you do is seen by someone or something without your knowledge is enough nightmare fuel for me. In Portal 2, it is revealed that GlaDOS has the personality of Carolyn. Carolyn is the assistant of Cave Johnson, and she was supposed to take over the company after he died. Something that Cave Johnson was obsessed with was the idea of being able to upload his consciousness into a computer so that he could live forever. He put his best scientists on it while he was dying from lunar dust exposure. His final wish when he knew that he was dying was for Carolyn to take over the company, and for her personality to be put inside of an AI if the technology was ready. This led to her being forcibly uploaded into GlaDOS. This effectively makes the two one and the same. For some reason, GlaDOS has no memories of Carolyn even though her consciousness has been uploaded into her. The idea of someone being forcibly uploaded into an AI is simply terrifying. Portal and Beta looked very different. Now, this is common for most games. As they're worked on, things change and eventually become what the developers release. Portal actually started out as an entirely different game. A team at DigiPen Institute of Technology made a game called Narbocular Drop. Valve loved the original game so much that they hired the majority of the original team to make Portal for them. Once acquired, they were given all the Half-Life assets to work with as they designed their game. The 2005 beta actually looked just like Half-Life in style and feel. The team wanted to diversify the game, but used a lot of assets to build the game while they were working on new assets. Notable changes are the lack of GlaDOS or any AI guiding the player. The game felt more like Half-Life as it was a mostly silent experience. The end goal was just to escape the facility. The Portal beta can be a bit of nightmare fuel for those who don't like the uncanny valley. Everything in the beta feels like Portal, but is off in different ways. It's interesting to look at the game we could have gotten if they'd kept using a lot of those early assets. This is something I probably could have mentioned above, but felt like there's a large enough number of people that played Portal without looking into the lore at all. Portal is set in the Half-Life world, or it's probably better to say that they share a world. This can be seen in many different references to Half-Life that can be found in Portal. So not only did the game borrow the assets from Half-Life, but also the entire world. The connection between the games also makes Portal feel like it's part of something bigger. It makes you wonder what is happening outside of Aperture that Chell will be going into once she escapes. There are plenty of murals that can be found in each of the Rattmann dens, but none of them can hold a candle to how terrifying this one is. A picture of a screaming woman, a group of what looks to be scientists suffocating in the back, and a very menacing looking GlaDOS above. This is clearly a depiction of the day that GlaDOS released a deadly neurotoxin on the facility. This moment has clearly left a massive scar on the psyche of Doug Rattmann. The way he captures the moment in so much detail also shows that he was likely close enough to see it all happen. Something else of note is the woman in front who is screaming and looking terrified. Notice that she's not wearing a lab coat. This means that she's most likely not a scientist, as this is too specific of a detail. There's a theory that this mural also depicts the exact moment where Caroline was forcibly uploaded into GlaDOS. The game never explains the process of uploading consciousness, but you can see a tube sticking out of her stomach, which looks like a strange way of explaining that away. This mural could be Rattmann explaining where everything went wrong, forcing Caroline into GlaDOS, activating her, and not expecting her to do the exact same thing she'd done every time they tried to before. Portal 2 was, during the beta phase, not going to focus on Chell at all. Instead, the main protagonist was going to be a character named Mel. The game was set before the first game, so that would make it a prequel. The game was supposed to focus more on Cave Johnson and everything he was doing while still alive. It would also highlight more of the unethical testing that Aperture was doing, which could have shown how much darker the tests were. The changes were eventually dropped, and instead they brought back Chell and GlaDOS, as they thought players would rather see that story continue. The Portal 2 beta would inspire a lot of the community though, as we'll see later on in the Iceberg. ApertureScience.com was a website created for the Portal ARG that allowed users to log into a computer with different usernames and passwords. The ARG was very well incorporated, and it really made this game feel more mysterious. The website was mainly designed to promote Portal, but it became more than that. It was a vital part of the lore of the series, giving glimpses into parts of the games you couldn't see otherwise. It was the ultimate tool for building story and characters without implementing them in the game. There's a scientist whose account you can log into. When you do, this is the message you'll see. When was the last time you left the building? Has anybody left the building lately? I don't know why we're in lockdown. I don't know who's in charge. I did find out a few things. Like these terminals don't have to tap out characters one at a time. And while we're all working on 20-year-old equipment, somehow they can afford to build an enrichment center? Check out this security feed. Whatever the hell a relaxation vault is, it doesn't have any doors. I don't think going home is part of our job description anymore. If a supervisor walks by, press return. This single log sets up the terrifying work environment that Aperture was holding their employees to. It even hints at a possible lockdown before the events of GlaDOS' slaughter of the scientists. It is believed that this scientist could be Doug Rattmann, but no name was ever given. Vanilla Crazy Cake is an achievement in Portal and also an old phrase that GlaDOS said in previous versions of the game. There was a section where Chell had to chase GlaDOS and GlaDOS would yell random cake references. One of those was Vanilla Crazy Cake, which she would yell over and over again. The Borealis is a ship that vanished without a trace from Aperture Labs. This was mentioned by a scientist in Half-Life. Aperture Labs took some safety shortcuts in order to get funding for the project from Black Mesa. This led to the ship's teleportation functions not being safely tested. The ship one day vanished with the crew on board and taking part of the Drydock with it. This Drydock can be found in the depths of Aperture Labs while exploring with Potato GlaDOS. This Easter egg would mean nothing to anyone who hadn't played the Half-Life games or didn't know the lore past just Portal. This is one of the coolest but darkest connections between the games. It's said that Aperture were cutting corners, but to have a whole ship disappear without a trace is a step further. F-Stop was an experimental new game mechanic that Valve was toying with for the sequel to Portal. Eventually, Valve would shelf the game mechanic in favor of releasing a proper follow-up to the Portal game with Portal 2. F-Stop was a huge mystery for Valve fans for a long time until they finally gave permission to a small indie game studio to release footage of it. The footage was turned into a video called Exposure and showed the new game mechanic. The player could take pictures of objects and be able to manipulate them in the game world. This means you could take a picture of some moving blocks and then adjust their size and position by placing them in the world. No one knows why Valve decided to announce their mechanics like this, but it's one more mystery solved. At the end of the Portal comic, Doug Rattmann is shot while getting power to Chell's cryopod. Rattmann crawls his way into a relaxation chamber and falls asleep. It's never stated whether he passes away or not. There are several hints to his fate though, the main one being the voice you can hear in the Final Rattman Den. The song for that area is called The Ghost of Rattmann, meaning that he most likely didn't survive his injuries, and Chell is now hearing the ghostly voice of Rattmann. Another way to look at it is that he did survive, and that the song is referring to what he left behind once he escaped the facility. All of his drawings, his guidance, and possibly his sanity. There's another theory that Doug Rattmann actually escaped Aperture and is now living on the moon with his companion cube. Rattmann seemed to have a bit of an obsession with the moon, and it's believed that's where he ended up. One of the achievements in the game is called Last Transmission. In order to get it, you have to bring a radio into a certain Rattmann Den. Then a message will play out that you can decipher. When you do, you get a picture of a companion cube on the moon. When you first pick up the portal gun in Portal 2, you find it next to a bunch of Rattmann murals and an orange portal on the wall. Above you is a perfect view of the moon. So Rattmann shot that orange portal and sent himself to the moon. This is where he was able to send that final transmission. Portal has some very apparent Greek mythology parallels. starting with the oracle or different turret that you can find while exploring Aperture. If you save this turret from the incinerator, it will start to say rather cryptic phrases. A lot of these phrases are related to things Cave Johnson said before, like, "Don't make lemonade or get mad." There is one that references Prometheus. The quote says, "Prometheus was punished by the gods for giving the gift of knowledge to man. He was cast into the bowels of the earth and pecked by birds." This quote is most likely referring to GlaDOS, as there are several hints in the game of this parallel. First, when GlaDOS is turned into a potato, she is cast into the bowels of Aperture and pecked at by birds before you find her. Also, the abandoned sector where you find her is called Tartaros 09, which is the underworld in Greek mythology. GlaDOS finds out that she's Carolyn, and where Carolyn's subconscious lives inside of her. After getting her body back from Wheatley, she explains the valuable lesson that she's learned from Carolyn, right before deleting her. The subconscious of Carolyn that was trapped inside of GlaDOS was now gone. Maybe that means her soul can rest, or maybe that she wasn't actually deleted. There's a few fan theories that dispute this scene. Overall, the idea that your subconscious, your soul, whatever is left of you, can just be deleted is pretty existential.
You know, being Carolyn taught me a valuable lesson. I thought you were my greatest enemy, when all along you were my best friend. The surge of emotion that shot through me when I saved your life taught me an even more valuable lesson, where Carolyn lives in my brain.
Carolyn, delete.
Goodbye, Carolyn. You know, deleting Carolyn just now taught me a valuable lesson. The best solution to a problem is usually the easiest one. And I'll be honest, killing you is hard. You know what my days used to be like? I just tested. Nobody murdered me, or put me in a potato, or fed me to birds. I had a pretty good life. And then you showed up, you dangerous, mute lunatic. So you know what? You win. Just go. It's been fun. Don't come back.
Portal Stories Mel is a mod that was created for Portal 2. The mod stars Mel, an Olympic athlete that wakes up in Aperture. This mod starts in a time before the events of the first game and took the name Mel from the cancelled prequel idea for Portal 2. Mel goes to a testing facility for Aperture, intended to test one of their relaxation chambers. The machine fails and she wakes up decades later. The facility is destroyed now and she has to escape with the help of the maintenance corps named Virgil. The story leads up to the start of Portal 2 and tries to connect the pieces a little more between the two games. Aperture Science has a long list of unethical tests that they've done. A lot of them resulted in the death of human testers. Some of these experiments were replacing human blood with gasoline, replacing human blood with peanut oil, and implanting large chips in people's heads. Those tests seem bizarre and unethical, but it goes deeper. Aperture also tried making humans excrete coal, pumping fluorescent calcium into the bloodstream of test subjects, creating tumors, a teleportation system that accidentally removed the subject's skin, and splicing human DNA with mantis DNA, creating a deadly mantis man. Many of the early test subjects for Aperture were seen as the brightest and best that humanity had to offer, including astronauts, Olympians, and war heroes. After many of these people were never seen from again, Aperture was being investigated for their disappearances. This led to Aperture instead testing on the homeless and poorer individuals. These tests became more depraved than before, usually offering money in order to take apart a human and put them back together. Aperture is pretty much the epitome of mad science. They did experiments that no one else seemed to even care about finding results for. The list of deaths caused by Aperture is massive and possibly expanding. GlaDOS mentions Android Hell and says it's a real place where androids are sent at the first sign of defiance. This is her direct quote. Android Hell could be many different places in the facility. There's a room where androids just scream and yell, and this could be an extreme form of psychological torture. Another area could be the incinerator or trash compactor rooms. The androids in these rooms would be sent to their deaths before being reused to make new androids. Both of these can be pretty hellish, and especially the incinerator room, since it's literally androids being sent to their fiery demise. There's an intelligence core that falls off of GlaDOS during the battle with her. If you hold the core for a while, it starts to list off a cake recipe. This seems to be in line with the emphasis on cake that Portal has. Of course, if you keep listening to the intelligence core, it starts to list off other ingredients. These ingredients seem to be used for preserving a human body. Listen to this.
1 18.25 ounce packaged chocolate cake mix, 1 can prepared coconut pecan frosting, 3/4 cup vegetable oil, 4 large eggs, 1 cup semi-sweet chocolate chips, 3/4 cup butter, adjustable aluminum head positioner, Slaughter electric needle injector, cordless electric needle injector, injector needle driver, injector needle gun, cranial caps, and it contains proven preservatives, deep penetration agents, and gas and odor control chemicals that will deodorize and preserve putrid tissue.
This is just one of those disturbing hidden moments that Portal contains. There's an image of a head crab that is trapped in an elevator shaft that has been floating around the internet for over a decade, which is pretty impressive since it's fake. There is sadly no head crab in the game that gets trapped in the facility. This image was taken for fact, and I'm not entirely sure where the first picture came from. I found a Reddit post from 10 years ago that is discussing the picture. The consensus was that it was cool but most likely fake. The source files don't even contain a head crab model, though this isn't that outlandish of a claim since the shared worlds were already established. The head crab also would have just been a really cool Easter egg. There's a theory that's mostly been proven true, the theory that every machine in Aperture is sentient. From the turrets to the cubes, even the cameras, all of them have some form of sentience. GlaDOS has a few voice lines that give away this theory. She states that the reassembly machine from the multiplayer has a life and isn't at your beck and call. She also explains that the door mainframe won't be alive anymore after Chell is able to escape using it. There's also wall panels and lifts that will move slightly to watch the player and then move back into place once they're looked at. The idea that everything around Chell is alive is kind of creepy. It means she is literally being watched no matter where she goes.
I went and spoke with the door mainframe. Let's just say he won't be, well, living anymore. Anyway, back to testing.
There was a turret that was cut from the game that would follow Chell around. It had a spider-like body and was generally pretty creepy. The turret was cut late in game development, and not much more is really known about it. There's a few screenshots that show what it would have looked like. These screenshots even show that it would have been able to follow Chell through portals, which would have been interesting. I know being followed is a big fear for a lot of people, so I guess this thing could have been a big piece of nightmare fuel for them. Being watched by GlaDOS isn't enough. You must also be followed by a spider robot. There's a theory that the intelligence cores are actually just the uploaded personalities of scientists that worked at Aperture. The technology to upload someone's personality onto a core wasn't first tested on Carolyn. They likely would have tested it on others to make sure it worked first. This theory could also mean that every piece of sentient machinery in Aperture is actually the uploaded personality of a test subject, which gives some credence to some of the cores having wildly different personalities. This theory also implies that the testing cubes are created with different test subjects inside of them, which would mean that every time Chell has to destroy one, that she is actually killing what is left of a person. Cave Johnson wanted to have his personality put inside of an AI so that he could live forever. This didn't happen, and instead he passed away from lunar dust poisoning. But an early concept of the game actually had him put inside of a companion cube. Originally, this was going to be how the game introduced Cave Johnson. He would explain what happened and how it happened, rather than just listening to the tapes he pre-recorded. There's even a leaked script of how this encounter with Cave Johnson's companion cube would have gone down. It's pretty humorous, but also existentially horrifying. Cave Johnson states that he's alive for all eternity stuck in a cube on the floor, where you found him. Cave Johnson then asks you to kill him after talking to GlaDOS like she's Carolyn. Doing so leads to him having a moment of reprieve before dying. This scene was ultimately cut from the script, but it's so interesting that this script would fit in perfectly with the rest of the game. The Combine were invading Earth and for some reason never seized Aperture. This theory states that the reason they didn't is because Aperture and the Combine were secretly working together. The theory states that GlaDOS made an agreement with the Combine to create technology or whatever for them as long as they let them continue their tests unimpeded. This would explain why they never made any attempts to obtain any of the technologies that Aperture had been working on. There's a lot of theories near the bottom of this iceberg. This one states that Cave Johnson never actually died, that he somehow is alive somewhere away from everything. He is either being kept alive by being inserted into a piece of technology, or somehow faked his own death and went into hiding. There is very little evidence of this theory that I could find, just thought it was an interesting rabbit hole of thought to run down. Chell could be a clone. It's a theory that has existed since the release of the second Portal game, but where did it begin? GlaDOS claims that she has Chell's brain scans on file and permanently backed up in case anything bad happens to her. This seems to imply that she has the capability of cloning. She also mentions that she can clone Doug Rattmann when she is taunting him in the comics set between the games. So this confirms that either Aperture has the tech for cloning, or GlaDOS is using a very similar lie. This means there's a possibility that Chell is a clone, or at least can be cloned. GlaDOS and Wheatley mentioned that the testing facility at Aperture held 10,000 test subjects at one point. Now that number is just Chell, as the majority of other test subjects died while in their relaxation chambers. This would mean that 10,000 people just died while asleep, awaiting their turn to test. During the co-op campaign, humans can be found to be held in suspended animation. These would make for more useful test subjects, but they also perish due to a system malfunction. Somehow more people have died from bugs and malfunctions than from the actual testing. Portal, like many other games, has tons of unused content. For some reason, the amount of unused content and use of such objects has led to an air of mystery around it all. This also means some possible nightmare fuel is hidden amongst the unused content, like the walking turret we discussed before. Mostly what you'll find in the unused content from Portal 1 is voice lines of the turrets and GlaDOS. Most of these aren't super noteworthy, save for one about GlaDOS asking the player to leave the portal gun in order to get cake. Portal 2 had a lot of unused content, including the camera from f-stop that I mentioned before, also plenty of sound effects and ambient noise. There's also some voice lines and artwork that weren't used. There's also tons of unused assets that didn't make it into the game. These assets were assigned to different levels, but ultimately wouldn't be used but remained in the game files. One of the weirdest pieces of unused content is the sound for an NPC zombie. In the script files for the game, there's a file called npc_sounds_zombie_aperture. The sound is not in the game file and nothing happens if you try to spawn the file. This could have been a direct attempt to link Half-Life to Portal by bringing in the zombie enemies from Half-Life, but nothing is really known about this file. Hello everyone and welcome to the end of the video. Portal is one of those game franchises that I love to talk about, whether it's about the gameplay, the story, or any of the hidden creepiness that permeates throughout the game. Hope you all enjoyed this look into the darker side of Portal. Be sure to sub to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. I'll see you all in the next one.